What's up, everyone? Welcome to a special Campus Reform and PAS Report podcast episode. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure you visit the Campus Reform website, campusreform.org. Check out PAS Report, pasreport.com, and follow Campus Reform everywhere at Campus Reform. I got a great guest coming on. He's been on the program before. Dr. Stanley Ridgley is here. He's going to talk about his new book, DEI Exposed, how the biggest con of the century almost toppled higher education. Stan, welcome back. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Nick. It's great to be back on the PAS report and talking about an important issue that's coming to a head this week. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you my insights.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love the title of your book because it's so true that one, it is and was a con, always was, right from the beginning. It's a political ideology, it's not an academic discipline. And two, it did extraordinary damage to higher education. So now in your book, DEI Exposed, you explain how DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, this social justice agenda is a pseudo-science. Can you explain that to the people?
Well, yeah, I think that there's a front stage of DEI, and then there's a backstage. The front stage is what is publicly professed to the public. Oh, it's just teaching about race. It's just creating a level playing field. It's just representing historically underrepresented minorities. It's just teaching about slavery. And it's really none of those things. I should say, if those things actually happen, it's merely a byproduct of what they're really trying to do. And what they've tried to do, and the three things that I really like to say about DEI is that it is a big con game. It's an amazing con that has swindled millions out of the universities and colleges, and especially in the last 5 years, but going back farther than that. It's called virtuous victimhood, where this ideology that you refer to, and it is an ideology, divides people into two categories of villains and victims, good and evil, exploiters and exploited. And this is what is propounded on the college campuses, not level playing field, not, just teaching about race. It's about infliction of real psychological harm on our students. And I think that, in other words, they're training people into mental illness is a very direct way of saying it. They're training young people how to behave according to paranoid personality disorder. And by this, I mean they're training people to say, well, you're a victim and you need to watch out for all of these things that's going to come your way. Always be on the qui-vive, be on the alert for the oppressors. And as far as you guys, you're the oppressors, and you need to curtail your behavior, curtail your racial microaggressions, become an ally in this basically a cramped worldview of villains and victims. And this has been going on for far too long. The grifters, the DEI people, have established an amazingly, you have to admire it. I mean, it's a brilliant ploy. It's bureaucracies that are lavishly funded. They exert control in all corners of the university, or try to. They're modestly educated people. They're lavishly compensated. I'll give you an example. University of Michigan. Tabia Shavu receives $417,000 a year to do diversity. Dania Matos at Berkeley, she receives $331,000 a year to lead with love. Then you've got the two characters at University of Virginia. This is my favorite. Two of them, the top two DEI people, receive $500,000 each in benefits and salary to propound this ideology of diversity, to lead with love, to lead with inclusion and belonging. So,
well, I actually want to pick on the University of Michigan a little bit because at Campus Reform, we reported how they've spent $250 million since, I believe, either 2016 or 2018 on diversity, equity, inclusion. Now, are you aware of any study, a single study, that shows that $250 million investment improved student outcomes in any way, improved student achievement, improved student performance in any way?
Actually, no. In fact, studies have shown that they're really at a standstill. It's done absolutely nothing except to line the pockets of the members of this bureaucracy, which is well over 200 people. I should tell you that in 2016, when this program at Michigan began, it began under the tutelage of the chief provost diversity person by the name of Robert Sellers. And by the time he left his position in 2022, he was bringing in $431,000 a year to do the work of diversity. Well,
It's more than the president of the United States gets paid.
and the president of, I assume, of the University of Michigan as well, but certainly the governor of Michigan, I should say. Well, who did they find to replace Robert Sellers? Well, they did. I looked it up. They did a national search, and the person they came up with was his wife, Tabia Shavu Sellers, who by now is making $417,000 a year. It's not only it's in the family. It's gross nepotism.
Oh, absolutely. And it's such a scam because I really want to put it out to the people. The reason that I say it's a political agenda is because it's clear there are only certain issues that are DEI certified. So if I criticize illegal immigrants in inner cities and say that they're taking away from those that are on the lower socioeconomic scale, they're impacting those communities in a negative way, well, I'm anti-DEI, right? I'm described as one of those outsiders. I'm the inherent racist that exists. So they determine what is social justice and what is not. They determine what equity is and what equity is not. And a lot of times, you pit these groups against each other and the result always fails. It's fact-based. But you explain how this is the exact opposite of higher education, that this is an anti-enlightenment movement. It's an anti-intellectual movement. It goes against open inquiry and intellectual rigor that the universities are supposed to stand for. So when you look at how the universities have changed, they're part of the intellectual class. What went wrong?
Well, the problem with DEI is just like any other pseudo-science or any other kind of doctrine that manages to get a hook into the university. 300 years ago, we began to expunge this type of nonsense from the university: alchemy and astrology, various pseudosciences, phrenology, and sorcery and superstition, in favor of a university crafted and built on logic, reason, progress, scientific method, humane values, the marketplace of ideas, which is still the prevailing view of the university, which is unfortunately really has been replaced by a view, the Marxist view of the university as a kind of a crucible of instruction to create cadres for struggles of the future. That's kind of a paraphrase of the Marxist theorist Frederick Jameson, who was at Duke when I was at Duke, that basically he views the university as a tool for indoctrination. This is a common theme amongst the people that you and I are talking about right now, these DEI types. So what they've done is they, being the DEI advocates and their allies, have taken a framework, a very primitive binary framework that goes back to the teachings of Mani over 1,000 years ago. It's called Manichaean, good and evil. It's a very simplistic framework, and they superimpose that onto the university. Now they have managed, they being, of course, the people who have flooded into the university and bureaucrat positions, ancillary support staff. I'm talking about academic advisors and residence hall managers and the occasional clerk. Well,
they don't hire full-time faculty anymore, that's for sure.
No, they don't. These are people who are ancillary support staff, and they manage to get a master's in higher education, which they assume qualifies them as college educators and to move into the classroom. And these are the people who conduct the trainings that we hear so much about. The trainings where students are basically slotted into one of two groups. And you are told that you are, if you're white, you're a racist, and this is not going to change, and that you must acknowledge this, you must confess this, and vow to be an ally working for the greater good of whatever social justice project that they want to put in front of you.
And they use that word ally for a reason, because if you're not an ally, that means you're an adversary.
Exactly. Again, it's that binary of good and evil, of either or. There's no in between. So this doctrine superimposes this template, and there's no escape from it. And the people who are propounding this are all over the campus. They have, I would say, a mantra that we want to seize educational moments wherever they present themselves. And they use the term milieu management, which means that they're going to manage the entire milieu of the campus, 24 dining halls, residence halls especially, wherever, academic advising, wherever students find themselves facing an ancillary support staff member, they will be confronted with the social justice message. This has all happened slightly under the radar, but it's easily found by anyone who wants to take the trouble to read their incredibly boring journals, which I have done, much to my chagrin. It's helped my sleep, I should tell you.
I want to get to the academic ecosystem in a minute, but I want to pick on the University of Michigan a little bit more here because it's just easy to do. They're an easy target. And they're not the only ones. But again, at Campus Forum, we put out an article where we explain how they now have rebranded DEI. They announced we're shutting down diversity, equity, inclusion to comply with the president's orders. And now we're going to have the Office of Community Culture. They didn't change the mission of it. It remains the same. Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame, same thing. They're rebranding. Columbia University, they're just simply rebranding. They're not going down without a fight, right? And this is something that we're going to see. And what should the people, what should students, parents, faculty members look for in order to push back against the continued pushing of DEI down our throats?
Well, I tell you, it's a tough battle and it's a long battle, but maintaining a high alert for threat situations and spotting these people, it's not policy, it's personnel. Personnel is policy. And if you simply change the name of something, give someone a different title, which I've seen, but you keep the same personnel, you've got the same situation under it's old wine under a new label. And
they're a nefarious bunch,
aren't they? Though feral cunning, and so this book focuses on DEI Exposed on DEI, but these are the same people that I talked about in my previous book, Brutal Minds, which I think is a very nice companion volume, which focuses on the tenacity of these people in propounding their worldview. I would say, traditional liberals and conservatives on the campus, such as we are, we don't look at teaching that way. We're not trying to impose or indoctrinate someone. We believe in that marketplace of ideas of these other folks, some faculty, but mainly these bureaucrats who are controlling the environment. They believe in a different view, and they are basically messaging students again 24/7. In my previous book, Brutal Minds, I give tells, how you can tell if you're in a threat situation if you're a student, and what you can do specifically to protect yourself, what you can do to, if you're inclined to do so, to actually respond to it and fight back, but mainly how to shield yourself against the indoctrinations of these scalawags and rascals on the campus. And I'm being very generous and gentle with that. In DEI Exposed, I think the most important thing to remember is that these are scam artists. They're not educated well. These are the grifters from off campus. Now, what's really funny is I talk about the language and the lingo of the big con, and there's a whole group of con artists out there, and they used to have terms like grifters and marks or suckers. And if you're a small-time grifter, which is what DEI people used to be in the last decade, you're running a short con off campus. They're called peanut grifters. I love that name. These are but the peanut grifters have come onto the campus, and on the campus they're all running their own short cons as part of the big con of virtuous victimhood. And so recognizing that, and recognizing that there is basically a quid pro quo with guilt-riven administrations that, we're hand-wringing over the rampant racism on our campus, which really does not exist, but we want to get absolution, a payout, and we're going to pay out for that absolution so that the riots and the disturbances don't come to our campus, and we'll get that absolution from our own DEI office. It's a beautiful scam in the old scams.
I mean, you say it's a brilliant business model. I mean, think about it logically. If you are saying that racism is inherent and that victimizer versus victimhood and, oppressor versus oppressed is all inherently built in, well, you can't solve the problem of racism. You got a never-ending business model. Yep. However, if you believe that racism is a learned behavior and that a society can actually grow, and obviously you look at the United States and our history, we're light years. As a matter of fact, you now have the most open and tolerant generation to ever exist who are being treated as if they're the biggest racists to ever exist. It's interesting how it works, but you see the nefarious nature to it. How much of this, and you explain it in the book, how much of this do we have to blame the bureaucracy in general for continuing to push this in our society?
They bear an awful lot of the blame. Of course, the blame actually falls on the people in the bureaucracy, but they're just doing what they were hired to do, which is to create this incredibly false model on the campuses of rampant racism. And if there's no racism to be found, we're going to train people to ferret out what they call microaggressions, which is in the imagination of the person who is feeling this. I don't feel someone's looking at me funny. That's a racial microaggression. And so they can pump up the number of instances on the campuses of so-called racism. I think Wilfred Riley had a great book called Hate Crime Hoax, which tallies that something like 15 to 20, maybe even 30% of these so-called racist incidents are basically fakes. this is pervasive in our campuses, on our campuses, and I think that the bureaucracies are responsible directly, but the administrations who are seeking this absolution, they open the doors to all of these grifters and hustlers to come onto the campus at incredible salaries to train people to be racist. They establish the fact that, oh, you're a racism and you're a victim. And they train people into mental illness, into behaving as if they, and I should say that the people attracted to this type of work all possess, I won't say all, many of them possess the dark triad personality traits of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. And you put those three together and you get the typical DEI person who is imbued with this zealotry and this mission to teach others the right way.
And interestingly enough, a lot of the people that have made millions upon millions of dollars in this DEI scam are actually wealthy elite white people. That's interesting how that works with the hundreds of billions of dollars in tax dollars that have been funding this operation. But it has come at a heavy cost to these universities. And I think that actually is the good news. We've seen public confidence in the university system decline to just 36 or 37%. We've seen the number of students are now looking at what colleges are teaching in the campus environment. They don't want this woke indoctrination. And so enrollments have been dropping in certain institutions, particularly like Columbia University, where you saw massive anti-Semitism because that was okay. And then you look at the idea of the donor class pulling their funds after the rampant anti-Semitism. You have the employers. 50% of employers just last year alone did away with four-year degree requirements because they don't like the way the students are graduating and the ideology they're coming in with. Are the academic people on these campuses in such a bubble that they don't realize that they're destroying their own livelihood, that they're putting their future at risk the more they keep this nonsense up?
The academics on campuses and the administrators, those who are in cahoots with each other, have an incredible amount of hubris about this. They're on the mountaintop of morality. They're signaling their virtue. And when you can signal virtue with other people's money, there's no limit to how much virtue you're going to signal. But what I think, and they are in a bubble, but I think that bubble is going to burst. The bubble's going to burst on February 28th. I think it's this is when the deadline hits for the Dear Colleague letter that was sent out on February 14th. And the Dear Colleague letter from the Education Department, Office of Civil Rights, says this: you will bring your university into compliance with U.S. civil rights law and equal protection clause of the U.S. Constitution. If you do not, within 14 days, you are at risk for losing federal funds. And that doesn't mean that you're going to be investigated. That means that you will have opened yourself up to an investigation. If there are any complaints, we will bring our investigatory powers to your campus. And if you are found wanting, if you are found not in compliance, then you will lose your federal funding in the form of grants, in the form of students that are attending your university on federally guaranteed student loans. And this is absolutely amazing. I'm gratified and delighted that this is happening. And you mentioned, are they in a bubble? Yes, the bubble's going to burst. This brings it all to a head, and you have to make a decision, university administrators. And I predict that most colleges and universities are going to comply. They're going to rid themselves of DEI. And I should say the letter itself says, no, you can't rename your DEI office to the Office of Inclusive Excellence. That's not going to work this time. We'll be looking at that. And so we're going to find universities and finding out where their principles really lie. I should say that colleges and universities have been violating U.S. civil rights law for some time now. Yes, they have. And this letter simply says we're going to apply our interpretation of U.S. civil rights law, which is basically, as it reads, and we're going to apply that to you. And we're going to find out if you're in compliance. So I'm just so excited. This has been a wonderful week. And I'm looking forward to the next several weeks as this unspools and we find out how universities and colleges are going to respond. If I could interject here, one thing. Chronicle of Higher Education and Inside Higher Ed are two publications that I follow very closely. I'm very disappointed in them in the sense that they have taken sides in this whole issue and they have misrepresented to a large extent what is actually happening with regard to the current administration, its executive orders, and this latest letter. And I'm going to be closely watching those two publications along with other publications to see how whether they come around like Jeff Bezos has brought the Washington Post around, we'll see if these two educational publications come around as well.
I agree. I mean, I read those same publications, and sometimes there's actually good articles in them,
Yep.
and they provide an interesting point of view. But over the last decade, I've seen a major shift in these publications where it is more about ideology. It's like the loyalty oaths that you have to pledge your loyalty, your fealty to this far left woke agenda, consequences be damned, and it's not about academics anymore. But do you think that private institutions will be much more inclined to follow the new orders compared to the public state university systems that are government funded on the taxpayer's dime in those states?
Oh, yes, because that's the wonderful thing about this letter. It puts federal dollars at risk, whether it's a publicly funded institution or whether it's a private institution receiving research dollars and having lots of students, going to school on Pell Grants, other federally funded grants. And that's the key point. That's why this is so different. It's such a sea change in how we view higher education. And I'm not surprised that a lot of people are squealing about this, because especially the bureaucracies in DEI, they see that their sinecures are evaporating. The good wine days, the Roman bath days, wearing togas, that's all over. They're going to have to adhere to U.S. civil rights law, treat people with equality as the Constitution commands us to do in the social contract, and we've agreed to. And again, it's going to be wonderful. I'm optimistic.
Well, I'm glad about that, and I'll get to that optimism with the last question. But before the last question, I got a question about your interactions with faculty members. So when we look at faculty, obviously higher education faculty leans left. That's no surprise there. But one thing I've noticed over the last couple of years is even faculty that are to the left of the political spectrum have grown tired of DEI, have grown weary of it. In fact, many on the left in faculty have actually been targeted by the DEI mobs. And we've reported that at Campus Reform, where they agree with a lot of the ideology, but they said one thing wrong, and so the mob comes out, and that's it. Are you seeing the same thing? Are you seeing that there are faculty out there, even if they skew to the left politically, that they're just tired of this nonsense?
I will tell you that's the truth. I get emails and I get people coming by my office and giving me a thumbs up like that and a fist and saying, there are a lot of people behind you, but they just don't want to speak up for whatever their own personal reasons. And I don't.
Grab your cojones, people, speak up.
Yeah, you do what you have to do. However, some people don't have the stomach for that type of open conflict. But I've seen a real shift in the faculty, liberal faculty, as well as kind of redundant right there, liberal faculty, as well as the occasional conservative, but certainly I will say really surprising among my Indian colleagues, amongst my Israeli colleagues, and amongst my Chinese colleagues. I find that there is a kind of a uniformity, like they don't understand what's going on with all this stuff. They come to me for explanations, and I explain to them just like I've explained to your audience today what's going on, and they cannot believe it. But yeah, there is a change, and I think that change is going to build momentum as we go.
Do you think we could get back to the concept, the core academic mission of academic excellence, introduce the standards and encourage merit within these college campuses? Do you think a time that we're going to see a re-enlightenment, let's say, of the college campus throughout the country?
I think that we're in the midst of a renaissance right now. Once you lower standards, it's very hard to get them back up again, as you know, because then you begin to reject students that you were admitting, and that means dollars. And so there's a lot of financial problems with reimposing those standards, particularly with the degradation and decline of our K through 12 system, the pipeline. But I think that there are enough good students out there who want a real education, and there's enough alternative institutions like the University of Austin and Hillsdale College and that sort of thing, College of the Ozarks, that provide that real classical education with high standards and rigor. And I think that our colleges, my own in particular, are very concerned about academic performance and increasing the rigor of the admission standards, bringing in the very best students who really want to learn in the traditional way. So yeah, that's the answer to your question. Yes.
That's good. And that's what I'm seeing in the classroom. My students, they're all willing to learn, they're engaged,
right,
and I have high expectations of them. And I believe in the Pygmalion effect that they can rise up to those expectations. Everyone needs to check out DEI Exposed, how the biggest con of the century almost toppled higher education. Stanley, always a pleasure to talk to you. Enjoy the conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. And make sure, everyone, we're going to have links up at the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. Check out campusreform.org. Thanks so much for coming on, Stan.
My pleasure, always.